Hello, everyone. So on this pre-Passover workshop, I wish everyone, as we open, a happy Passover. And my objective here tonight is to help us all make the Seder transformative. How do you like that? Many people, I know this from my own experience and from what I've heard from many people, the Seder at best is a nostalgic, warm, social get-together. At worst, it's a nightmare, especially in dysfunctional families. And in between is usually something like a combination of a boring, monotonous technical thing with a bunch of giggling, and at some point everyone says, we're hungry and let's eat. So regardless of your range of experience, the fact is that Jews are considered to be a pretty wise nation, wise people. And they've been doing these Seders now for 3,323 years and counting. So they must be doing something right. Because no one else has lasted, not the Romans, and not the Greeks, and not the Persians, and not even the Egyptians, the Egyptian Empire. So the question is, what is the secret behind this Passover power? The secret of a Passover Seder. And that's the objective here. The mission, so to speak, is to decipher and uncover the secrets of the Seder, to demonstrate how it's a mosaic for our lives, a complex and comprehensive map, as we shall discuss, a 15-step journey, that when you really appreciate and understand its deeper meaning or inner meaning, it is extremely relevant to our personal, psychological, emotional, spiritual lives. And obviously, speaking to all of you here, the key is to lay out the elements so that you can personalize it and customize it to your own personal life. So I'll give a few introductions. I want to make sure everybody has this card. They should have given it to you at the door. For those online, just go to our website, meaningfullife.com, and type 15 steps, and you'll find actually a longer version of this, which you all can access as well. This is like a summary. This is meant to also be a type of insert for the Haggadah. So in case the Seder gets boring, just look at this and dream about the matzah balls. That should do the trick. Okay. So with that being said, let me go through a few introductions, that I think will help set the tone. And what I'm going to do is actually go through every one of these 15 steps, and I'll explain what they are in this introduction. So, very important to translate certain words that are usually mistranslated, and therefore, obviously, contribute to the obscurity and to the mystery and to the cryptic nature of the holiday. So I want to translate a few words. The word Pesach, which is the name of the holiday, Passover, Pesach. We talk about what is the Haggadah, which is the main text used throughout the whole Seder night. What does the word Seder mean? So I'm not going to leave any stone unturned, hopefully. Obviously, this cannot exhaust the entire Seder, but it will be enough to really lay out the lay of the land. So we have to first establish what is the purpose of a Seder. We have to always begin from the beginning. What is the axiom? The first axiom is, what is the purpose of a Seder? Which of course leads us to the bigger question, what is the purpose of Passover? Which of course leads us to the bigger question, what's the purpose of our lives? We can keep on going, but you get the idea. So the secret lies in the word itself, Pesach, and in another word that I will translate, Mitzrayim, which is Hebrew for Egypt. So we all know the Passover story. The story has been documented. It's in the Bible, of course, but it's been popularized. It's one of the most famous stories in history. The exodus of maybe it's the first documented racial oppression and discrimination of a nation, where the Jews were enslaved by another nation, the Egyptians. And Passover, is a celebration of what's called the Exodus. So we know a film called Exodus. There's a film called The Ten Commandments, Cecil B. DeMille, a silent version, a sound version, 1956, and other epics, cartoons. A few years ago, Prince of Egypt. The story of Egypt and Exodus has captured the imagination of so many people and part of literature. It is inspiration for so many different things in life. As a matter of fact, even if you go to the founding fathers, their initial symbol that they wanted to put on the currency of America was Moses leading the Jews out of Egypt to the Red Sea. So you have many symbols and many ideas that are based on Egypt and the Exodus from Egypt. Some even suggested that Hebrew should be the language of the United States. It just became a little difficult to achieve because no one knew Hebrew to teach it, I guess. And many other symbolism, because ultimately Exodus is probably, as I said, the first document story of freedom from slavery, which is the story of the United States. It's the story of the French Revolution, story of Western society coming out from under the oppression and from the chains of the autocrats and the monarchs and the church and so on of the Middle Ages and the early ages. So what exactly then is the deeper story, however, of this Exodus? Why is it that we still celebrate it today? So yes, we can say it's the first of all democracies, the first of all freedoms, but there's a much deeper reason, and it's based on a Talmudic statement that says in every generation, and some add in every day, we have to envision, Chayav Adam, a person is responsible to envision as if they just left Egypt. So it's one thing to say we commemorate the event. But to say that we actually have to envision as if we left Egypt seems odd. To that extent, first of all, most of us have never been to Egypt. I know some of us have been. And even if you have been, but to envision every day, why would we continue to have to remember something that's 33,323 years old, as if we are reconstructing the Exodus from Egypt? We're not leaving the country. It's a different time of the world, different time in history, a different part of the world, and so on. So the answer lies not in the word Egypt, but in the word Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim, the translation in Hebrew of Mitzrayim is boundaries. In Hebrew, Meitzar means a boundary. Mitzrayim is boundaries, many boundaries. What context is boundaries here? The context is that it's referring to anything that binds you, any form of slavery, any addiction, any inhibition, any psychological, emotional, physical restraint that constrains us and limits us, and we feel like we're in prison, is Mitzrayim. And that changes the entire equation, because that means what we're actually honoring and celebrating and recreating on Passover is, in one word, transcendence. And that's the definition of the word Passover. Pesach. It means to jump over, to pass over. It's a form of transcendence. So transcendence and constraints and inhibitions are the two poles here. So Yetzias Mitzrayim, which means to actually leave boundaries, means the experience of transcendence. That one word captures, in many ways, the search of all entire human race from the beginning of time to transcend our limitations. And we have tried to do so in so many different ways. Spiritual transcendence from the monotony and routine and the rut and grind of daily life. This isn't just new in the 20th. This isn't just a phenomenon in the 21st century. From the beginning of time, you read the poets, the writers, the dreamers, the lovers, everybody trying to find some type of relief of material existence. Some of us do so through romance and love, through music, through art, through religion, spirituality, through vacation, through travel, through our hobbies. There's so many ways that we look for this type of transcendence. And on the other extreme is we all have our traps. We all have our inhibitions, we have our fears, we have our physical restraints, our jobs, our responsibilities, commitments, even good ones, but they still are responsibilities. And often they seem to bear down on us. In one word, that could all be called a form of slavery. Our addictions is definitely a form of slavery to our master. So you have to broaden the context of Passover into a personal experience of transcending boundaries. Now, the challenge that you have here is now determining and defining your boundaries, because each of us have different boundaries. Each of us have different fears. Each of us have different psychological challenges. And it's critical, obviously, to personalize it. So, to sum up, the essence of this is of Pesach, of Passover, is finding freedom. But not just freedom in the political sense, because we may be politically free. It's in the personal sense. In the sense of even sneezing is a form of transcendence. It's like some impediment that got stuck in your way, into your passages, and so I just demonstrated of a small form of it. Magnify that many times over, and a sneeze turns into a hurricane, a wind tunnel, a cleanser, a type of thing that cleans things through. So with that being said, now then, if that's the objective of Passover, then the Seder, which is essentially the center piece, the cornerstone of Pesach and Passover, captures in essence this experience. And that's why Pesach, unlike any other holiday, has such an intense program. Even though Yom Kippur and other days of the year have prayers and so on, but to do so in our homes, in an elaborate process, in a Seder, is unique to Pesach. And Pesach being the first and the head of all holidays, sets the tone for the entire year of transcendence. This is the Rosh Hashanah of transcendence. Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah, the actual Rosh Hashanah that we call Rosh Hashanah, is the Rosh Hashanah, the new year for the natural order. And Pesach is the new year for transcendence. So the Seder encapsulates a elaborate process, a sophisticated process, which consists of 15 steps that teach us how to reach that freedom, personal freedom. And this is the meaning of the word Seder. Seder in Hebrew means order. It's an order. Order means some form of structure. But the key thing to remember that this structure is in order for us to transcend structure. One of the Rebbes once said that there's only 2 Seders outside of Israel, so we shouldn't have a chazakah, we shouldn't have 3, which in Hebrew, in Jewish law, constitutes some type of perpetuity, some type of continuity. So though we have an order, but we shouldn't have too much order. Let's put it this way. So don't take it out of context. For those that are super organized. So we have to know how to use this order in order to transcend order, basically. So that's the name of this. That's the meaning of the word Seder. Now, what's the meaning of the word Haggadah? Haggadah is the booklet that is, in a sense, captures and has the text that was developed over the last few thousand years by the rabbis, based on many of the biblical texts, based on Talmudic phrases, based on different things that were added at different times in history. The Haggadah is a narrative, and that's what the word means. Haggadah means to narrate, to tell, to relate. Relate as in relate a story. So when we talk about Haggadah, it comes from the word, the root of it is a biblical verse in Exodus, which says, V'higadata levincha. You shall relate, you shall tell it to your children. That's an actual verse in the Torah. So the story of Exodus, the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the story of Passover, is very much connected to telling it to our children, passing it on to the next generation. This will be very vital as we go along the Seder, as you see, focus on the children, focus on the narrative, focus on sharing it. It's not just a personal, selfish experience. It's a family one, it's a group one, it's a community one. Obviously, children doesn't always mean necessarily biological children. It also means students. We can all be our children of each other. Anyone that inspires someone else, anyone that has been inspired, is in a way of a parent-child relationship. So, in that sense, Vahigada Tolavincha, the Haggadah means to narrate, to tell the story. And that will be a critical, one of the 15 steps, as I said, we'll get to that. And then we have what other word that I want to translate? Pesach I did, Mitzrayim I did, Seder I did, Haggadah I did. Any other words will come up, I will use them. You see, the Hebrew words really carry the secret. When you translate them properly, it changes the entire context. So to sum up, it means basically the Seder has an objective. It's not just to commemorate rituals, empty rituals. It actually is there to help us find personal transcendence. So for the Seder to have true impact on your life, let me suggest the following, which is something we do before Passover, before the Seder. There's an expression, there's an edict taught by Moses, that 30 days or 15 days before a holiday, we begin to study the laws of the holiday. which means not just studying the laws technically, but also preparing our mindset. If you're about to go, if you have a scheduled appointment with a one-time in a lifetime opportunity of a venture capitalist, or getting yourself an excellent job, or something like that, you're not just going to walk in unprepared and wing it. You're going to prepare. And the more you prepare, the better your presentation will be. So why shouldn't we apply the same principle to a holiday? You want the holiday to have its impact on us, to help us actually change our lives, transform our lives, free ourselves. You have to go in with preparation. And the more you prepare, the more the Seder will have its power. Which brings me to one final thing I wanted to say as an introduction. Time in Judaism is energy. It's not linear. It's not the past, present, and future like a flow of a river. Time is energy which works like a spiral, which means every year Passover night, this year Monday evening, will be a new energy will enter into existence. The same energy that entered every year, that same 15th of Nisan, the full moon of this month, and the same moon that Moses and the Jewish people saw when they left Egypt. So there's an energy, and that energy repeats itself. So we're not just commemorating, we are actually recreating, and we're accessing something that is right there. And we access it through tools. It's like any type of energy. Energy dissipates if you don't have any containers and you don't have any tools to hold on to it. So this is what the Seder is all about. The Seder are the tools. So as preparation, besides of what we're doing right now, I want to suggest a few things. First thing I suggest is you have to identify. You know, to say, for like, you go to a doctor and say, "Doctor, I have a problem." It's very nice, but it's good to identify where the problem is. Even though there's that Jewish joke where the guy goes to a dentist, and the dentist says, "So what's hurting you?" He says, "You're the dentist. You find out. You know, I'm paying you for it, so for you to find out." But it's always good to identify. Is it which part of our bodies? What part? Same thing is in our spirits. Passover and the Seder is meant to help us actually leave differently, which means the goal is that after the Seder you should be a different person than when you went in. I know that's a big, tall order, because how many people can say that a Jewish experience actually changes you? But in order for that to do so, you have to identify what are the mitzrayims in your life. What are your boundaries? Now, you can make a long list, you can make a short list. To make it practical, and as I said from my experience, if you can identify 3 items, you could do it now, you have time the next day or two, but you can identify 3 items that you would like to transcend. These can be psychological fear, it can be the fear of, there can be a bad job, relationships, trying to get out of a bad one or getting into a good one, or something in between. Anything that is blocking you. This can be financial restraints. It doesn't matter. It has to be, however, something that you're concerned with, something that affects your life. Identify a few mitzrayims, a few of your personal fears, inhibitions, restraints, constraints, addictions, prisons that trap you. That is an excellent first step, because then you have something to focus on. And the Seder will help you free yourself from it. And we shall see how. But if you don't do that, it's going to be extremely difficult to experience a transcendence just in the general sense of it. Of course, by the grace of God, God can send everybody a blessing. But God helps those that help themselves, which means our job is like going to the doctor. You have to identify as best as possible. And that too, by the way, can be an effort, because sometimes we don't even know what our problem is. We just know things are not good. And we may know the symptoms, identify the symptoms, but can't identify the root. But you have to do the best you can. And maybe with an objective friend, you could say, you know, here are the 3 things in my life. What do you think is the root of it? The better you prepare with that, the healthier it is. And it's not that difficult. You just have to look at the areas in your life that you really don't like, and that you'd really like to change. It could be, as I said, a most popular one, and not that we're doing a popularity contest, is relationships. You know, you've been looking for a soulmate, and it's time has come. That's a completely legitimate type of need, and there's something that's trapping you. You know, and so what is it? You may not even know what it is. So maybe that's part of what you're looking for. And it could be other things in life. It could be an aimlessness, an emptiness. It could be financial challenges. Whatever they may be, this is the time of the year to apply it, because this is the mitzrayim of each of our lives. And there's no better way to fulfill the mitzvah, the obligation that I mentioned before, chayev adam liris atzmei, that a person is responsible, obligated to see themselves as leaving Mitzrayim every year, every generation, every day, as he adds in Tanya and some other places. What better way to experience that is by actually finding a Mitzrayim in your internal life or external life and saying, okay, here's what I'm going to experience, the leaving from that place. So you see, this is the goals, as I said, is a tall order. The fact that some of us are not even aware that this is what Passover promises is also part of the tragedy. So we're here to change some of that, to tell you that you have the right and you have the opportunity to change things in your life, and not to be resigned and not to be trapped by the status quo, which, by the way, is also one of the challenges, as we shall soon discuss. Just the fact that you believe and you hope for a better future is also critical, because if you don't, how are you going to expect a Passover and Seder to help you if you yourself psychologically, emotionally feel that nothing is going to work? Because whatever you tried hasn't worked. So you have to open yourself up to a new possibility. And that's what a new Passover is all about. Fresh beginning. And that's now, with that introduction in mind, and identifying some of the individual specific elements of your own inhibitions or mitzrayims, I shall now go through the actual steps. Now, as I said, on this companion here is a summary of what I'm going to go through here. So you can follow it, or I shall elaborate. As I said, on our website, on meaningfullife.com, there's a more elaborate version of this, which you can access later if you like, print out. Just type in 15 steps, and you'll have a more elaboration on each of these 15. Now, we're going to break the 15 into three groups, 5, 5, and 5. Or to be more precise, 5, 6, and 4. But it's more or less 5, 5, and 5. Who's counting? Right. The first 5 are mostly cognitive and emotional stages. As I said, this is a journey. It's a journey into yourself, a journey into your psyche, a journey into a deeper place. The next 5 or 6 steps are more practical. They're actual action-oriented. The first 5 they have action, but the focus is more a change of state of mind, a new headspace, a new heart space, emotions. The next 6 are more action-oriented, and the last 4, which follow the meal, are primarily things that affect more the unconscious, and things that are not directly accessible through our own efforts. Because remember, in our Mitzrayims, we're going to be identifying several culprits as we go along these 15 steps. You know, the usual suspects and not such usual suspects that impede our way in reaching this Passover experience, this transcendence. So each step is meant, remember, this one objective, one destination, transcendence. Some form of transcendence. It could be of the highest, loftiest form, or it can be simply getting out of a bad habit. That's your choice. You know, it can be a combination. But the more you focus this on specifics and details, the greater will be the experience. We have some here, please. So we begin with the opening of the Haggadah. I should mention, in case some of you have never been to a Seder, or even if you have, one more thing which is not being covered here in this 15 steps. There's a Seder plate. It's called the kaira. Kaira in Hebrew means a plate. So usually that begins when guests come to the host, wherever the Seder you'll be doing. Usually before the Seder begins is the building of this kaira. And I say building doesn't mean you don't need a whole contractor. It takes a few minutes, but it's constructing a kaira. So I want to spell out what that is. Because it's the kaira becomes, and the Haggadah become the main elements or ingredients of this Seder. The kaira, which I discussed once at length, and I believe you could also find online some of the discussion, a kaira consists of 10 elements. And the 10 elements actually correspond to the 10 spheres, which if you're familiar with the Omer book, 10 spheres is all about the refining of a person's internal structure, the building blocks of existence, the building blocks of our personalities. So the 10 are the plate itself. Well, let's start from the top. There's the matzahs. There's 3 matzahs. Right here, we have a demonstration. We got 3 matzahs right here. So if I was building a plate right now, I would have these 3 matzahs, usually with something that separates between them. They correspond to the Kohen, Levi, Israel, the three categories of Jewish people: the priests, the Levites, and the Israelites. It also, which is an acronym for the word Keli, Kohen, Levi, Yisrael. Keli means like a container. It also is an acronym for the word Yelach, which is like movement or journey. On top of that, they'll place a napkin or something else that blocks, that separates, and then come 6 elements on the Passover. And to the right top will be the egg. The zrah, the shank bone, which is symbolic of the Passover offering. To the left will be the egg, which is symbolic of the destruction of the temple. In the center is the bitter herbs, the myrrh. To the right of that, so it's like 2 triangles. So to the right of that will be the chareses, which is the paste made out of wine, nuts, apples, usually. To the left will be the karpas. Karpas is one of the steps. Karpas is a vegetable or a bitter herb or an onion. Anything that is a vegetable that will be dipped in salt water. And to the bottom, the 6th item is again chazeres, is another piece of bitter herbs. And then you have the plate. So there you go, 6 items on top of 3 matzahs, 9. And the plate itself is malchut, is the thing that holds it all up. So I said, I'm not going to go through the plate structure here. We're going to do it through the 15 steps. But it's important to know because it's to cover the entire spectrum. So now we have. So here are the elements as you go into this experience. You have a Haggadah, which is, as I said, a text or a booklet that we read and follow throughout the Seder. You have Seder plate. You have a few bottles of wine and cups, of course, to drink the 4 cups of wine. So now we begin the 15 steps. As I said, I broke it into 3 groups. And the first opening thing, once the Seder plate is set, and the people and the guests are at the table, we begin with Kaddish. Often, children or someone will begin by saying actually the 15 steps. Kaddish, Urchatz, Karpas. There's a classic song that's saying Kaddish, Urchatz, Karpas, Yachad. Magid, Rochza, Metzimatza, Morar, Kairech, Shulchan, Neirech, Tzofan, Beirach, Halal Nirtza. That's often a tune that I grew up with, and it's been a while since I've done it, so my children have it more figured out than I do. And so beginning begins with Kaddish, first step. Kaddish literally means to sanctify. It refers to something we do every Shabbos, every holiday, make Kiddush. The beginning of every sacred service in Judaism is around a cup of wine, even at a wedding, and the same is on Passover. But nevertheless, obviously the Passover Kiddush is unique because it's the first of 15 steps. You don't find that any other time of the year. So the word literally means to sanctify. But as I'm going to go through these steps, I'm going to spell out what it means literally, practically, and what the deeper meaning is, all in context, remember, of a 15-step journey to help free us from some of our mitzrayim, from some of our constraints and boundaries and fears and inhibitions. On a deeper level, the word kedusha or kaddish means to separate. To separate. Which means we basically separate from mundane to the sacred. Now, why is this a critical step? Psychologically speaking, you cannot enter a new space without creating some type of new mindset. For example, if you want to bring new furniture into your home, you bring new furniture into a new home, you need to clean out the room of the old stuff and the baggage, the old baggage, or the dust, or whatever else is cluttering the room. You bring something new into an old space, and you don't clean it out, the new is going to be very quickly become a victim and a product of the old. So the same is true psychologically. Many of us have very good intentions. We want to make a move in our lives. We want to find some freedom, some transcendence, some Pesach from our mitzrayim. And it's a very sincere intention. Whether we have suffered long enough or we've been trapped long enough, we really want to make a move. But I find that often people don't know how to make the first step. The first step is you have to be ready to clean out what you did before. You have to be ready to move away from the old habits. Now, you can't expect anybody to suddenly change everything and suddenly drop everything cold turkey, but at least you have to make an effort to recognize it, because if you don't, what's going to happen is you may be motivated and inspired, but it's not going to last very long. We always go back to the first culprit of any change is inertia. It's the status quo, the past routines. Look how often you've been motivated to do something, and then what happens is you just like gravitate right back to where you began, because we underestimate the power of habits and routines and day-to-day structure. You know, try to teach somebody to start brushing their teeth when they're 40 years old and they never did it daily. It's going to be almost impossible, because it's like doesn't fit it. For someone who's doing it, it's easy to do. And many things, exercise. Try anything new, and you'll see the hardest part is where do you have time for it? Even though your mind tells you, what do you mean, I have time when something is important, I find time. But routines have their own language, and they have their own power over us. And even good routines. So the first step, Kaddish, is saying, let us create space. Let us sanctify this moment. We're entering into a sacred moment where a new energy and a new night begins, a new holiday begins. It's a new Passover that never before ever existed. If you don't have that attitude, I'm not suggesting you can't get anywhere, but it's going to be a lot harder. So the first step is we take a cup of wine, we make Kiddush on it, we sanctify the moment, we sanctify the evening, we sanctify the experience. So the Seder begins by creating space, by separating. What was going on a day before, a minute before, is now new. This also helps get beyond the second culprit, which is resignation. When we're trapped in our routines, and we also have a certain sense that as the cynics say, the more things change, the more they stay the same. The more you try, the more you get right back where you began. Kaddish is a recognition that we're going into a really new sacred time, and you have to surrender yourself to perhaps new possibilities, to be arrogant in our resignation, to be convinced that nothing new can happen in your life. Obviously, you can become your own worst enemy. If you don't believe in yourself, who's going to believe in you? So Passover begins with Kaddish, a form of sanctification, sanctity. We begin the Seder with Kaddish, making a blessing over wine. I'm just reading it. Kaddish means to sanctify God's name, and the wine by blessing it also means to separate, referring to the separation between good and bad, holy and mundane. So it's creating the space to separate. Now, when you think about it, even though you do the Kaddish on wine, but it's really, the intention is mostly a mindset, mostly a cognitive type of preparation. Urchatz is like the twin of Kaddish, and that's why these two are the only two of the 15 steps that are connected by an urchatz. In Hebrew, when you say urchatz, you mean and. It's like saying sanctify and wash and cleanse. In Hebrew, the vav is like and. So all the others are self-contained and self-standing. Yachatz, magid, karpas, rochza. There's no vav, there's no and connecting. Because urchatz is like a continuation of making the kiddush, of the sanctification. Now what's technically the urchatz? Technically urchatz means to wash, or to cleanse. It means to wash our hands. Just to not confuse it, there'll be step 6 will also be a washing, but it's a different type of washing our hands. This one is actually unique to Passover. Any Shabbos, any holiday, we know we make Kiddush and then we wash our hands. This Urchatz, however, is unique because this one, firstly, we don't make a blessing. It's only a washing that prepares us to be able to eat the vegetable that comes in step 3. What does it mean psychologically in the context of the 15 steps of the journey? It means the context of, you all heard of a mikveh, right? Immersion in a mikveh. Mikveh is a ritual bath. It originates from the times of the Bible, and even prior to that, but the Bible talks about the priests, before they would go to do service in the temple, they would immerse themselves. So very big events, and when they had the time, like before Yom Kippur, it's a full immersion in a mikveh, which is a body of water where a person undresses and completely submerges himself or herself into the waters of the ritual bath of a mikveh. In other parts of the service, that type of full immersion isn't necessary. So we do is a minimal, it's a incomplete immersion, so to speak, meaning a symbolic immersion where there was a kir, there was a fountain outside of the temple. In one of the sections, it's talked about in the Bible, where the Kohanim and Levites would wash the Kohanim's hands and legs, arms and legs, which is basically when we wash our hands on Shabbos, and the same here, of course, in Passover. It's symbolic of that type of cleansing because we're entering into a type of service. So whether we're eating the challah on a Shabbos or we're eating the matzah later, here it's actually preceding the karpas, the vegetable. So it's a form of spiritual cleansing. And this is critical. Maimonides writes that a mikveh is not meant to be a bath. It's not about getting rid of, it's not about eliminating physical dirt, because for that you can go to take a shower or take an actual bath. A mikveh is really about spiritual cleansing. We're not talking about physical dirt, we're talking about psychological grime. So the process here of urchatz is in continuation to the mindset of a new space. We actually wash our hands. Why our hands? Hands are the tools that most of us use to interact with the world. You want to touch something, you want to grab something, you want to interact with something. Obviously, other parts of the body you can also use too, but the hands are actual tools. They're like shovels in a way. They're actually tools that you can retrieve things, you can move things by, and the fingers are especially crafted in a way you can hold on to small things, to big things, and so on. So hands is like symbolic of our interaction with the world around us. So if you want to enter into a sacred space and want to experience some transcendence, you need to be able to also physically experience it, and by saying, I'm going to wash my hands of my past, so to speak. So in the context of our Mitzrayim, what that means is that in addition to saying to yourself, I'm going into a new sacred space, you're actually washing your hands and saying that whatever I did with these hands and whatever I did in my life is I am now washing in a sense like saying that's the past. You're being cleansed for the next step, which we shall explain in a moment. So now we go to karpas. What's the next step? Well, basically, Kaddish or Chatz, I should add before we go to that, is in the spiritual spheres, it's Chachma and Bina. Chachma is like a mindset where you enter a new space. Bina is fleshing it out, which is the washing of the hands. And that's the connection of the Vav, where these two are linked, because they basically set the tone for all the other 13 steps. So once we have the Kaddish and Rachatz taken care of, in a sense we can begin traveling further. So we go to step 3. Step 3 is eating a vegetable dipped in salt water. As I call it here, getting unstuck. What is the symbolism of this? And this is vital because you'll see as the Seder develops, this theme will become much more unfold, which will unfold more. And here it is. Everything in life consists of matter and spirit, a body and a soul. And the rule is that everything that's materialistic enslaves us. Everything that's spiritual frees us. Simple as that. But let me qualify this, and that's where it gets more complicated. At the same time, Judaism does not advocate asceticism. The objective is not to separate from or refrain from, abstain from material activity. On the contrary, we were sent to this physical world to refine it, to transform it. So the goal here is not separation in the sense where we isolate ourselves. It's engaging with the world, but still recognizing that matter on its own, without spirit, is a enslaving force. It's the most powerful force in life. Because matter, by definition, is selfish, narcissistic. Matter occupies time and space like nothing else. Spirit does not. Spirit does not need time, a physical space, to exert its control. For example, let me explain this, and then I'll get back to the actual step 3 here. Each of you is sitting right now in your particular chair. There's no way that someone else can occupy that space unless you stand up. People can occupy a space together, but the physical space that you occupy, no one else. That means it's completely narcissistic. So then how could then two people love each other? even though physically they occupy different spaces? The answer is because they have a soul. If they did not, two corpses could not love each other. Pardon the morbid expression. Two tables don't love each other. Maybe they have their own way of communicating because they also have a spirit. But physical things, purely in their raw material element, if I share with you some of my food or money, I have to have less. So I may be benevolent, I want to share, but we cannot own the same thing. If I give you and you eat some of it, I will have less to eat. Again, that doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but it just means physicality and materialism, by definition, has parameters that are impenetrable. There's no way that those parameters can be pierced for two things to join as one. However, because there's a spirit within, there's a soul in matter, when we access the soul, two people can sit in different seats, but their love can be one that transcends the time and space. You could have two people millions of miles apart, and they feel like they're one. You could have two people who sit right near each other physically, and they hate each other. So you see, love has nothing to do with space. Obviously, you want to be close and see someone that you love. But the feelings of love do not change because space separates. Because you see, love is a transcendent and spiritual experience. It does not need time and space to feed it. The challenge is what happens, how do you reconcile these two worlds together? We are not just spirits, and we're not just bodies. So basically we have here is like a contradictory, antithetical forces at work. You have a selfless, spiritual, transcendental force inside of a very narcissistic and selfish body. That's the battle. So what we do is we try to sometimes battle even our transcendent spiritual side and try to use love as also part of our control game, which of course undermines its very nature. But I don't want to go elaborate too much on that. I want to get back to our discussion here. So you're going to see soon, both in this step and then the next step and the steps about matzah, that the Passover Seder is very much getting down, stripping things down to their raw elements, matter and spirit. And if you want to really find a way to free yourself from your Mitzrayims, your boundaries and constraints, you have to identify and be able to separate between the matter and the spirit. And you'll discover that the more addicted you are to something, the more trapped you are. It's because the matter has taken control in that particular area. And the key is to free its spirit. And that will help free you. You see, even in 12-step programs, we're talking about the 15 original steps before they cut out 3. And there are other differences, I should add. But you see, the first one is what? I don't have control over my life and I have to surrender to higher power. It's always recognizing that you cannot save yourself. And the more you deceive yourself into thinking that, the more trapped you are. You have to be able to accept that there's something greater than you. That's humility, and sometimes it's pride and arrogance gets in the way. I'm just using it as a parallel. So to go back to step number 3, karpas now. After this introduction, matter, spirit, body, soul, you're going to see how the Seder, especially with this, starting with this step 3, is all about figuring out these two forces. So what is karpas? Karpas literally refers to a vegetable. Usually people use either an onion or a potato. The vegetable grown in the ground represents the body. That's the body. Why is it the body? Because if you look in the Torah right in the beginning of Genesis, it says that when God created the human being, what did he do? Vayikach offer min ha'adama. He took dust from the earth. From the earth. Vegetable comes from the earth, symbolic of our body that comes from the earth. And he blew into it, he imbued it, instilled in it a breath of life, the spirit. Now we take this vegetable and we dip it in salt water. Salt water represents salty tears shed in emotional or painful times. Salt is a cleanser. Tears are an expression of the soul. We cleanse our bodies with our soul's tears, freeing ourselves from the illusion that the material world is the only reality. So this karpa step, after we began with the kadesh and chatz, this karpa step is actually symbolic of you and me. It is literally physically showing you there's two things. There's a piece of matter that comes from the earth, an earthy vegetable, and there's salt water. Now water in general is symbolic of anything spiritual. Even though water, you could say physically is not necessarily a spiritual thing, but it reflects spirituality in many different ways. For example, you have Isaiah's famous prophecy where he says, in the future there'll be a world filled with knowledge, divine knowledge, as the waters cover the sea. We, for the first 9 months of our lives, are completely submerged in embryonic fluids. Water, when you go into water, you feel like you belong. They might as well add the real estate dimension. Beachfront property is always the most expensive. So the evolutionists will tell you the reason is because we were once amphibians and we all want to go back to become frogs again or tadpoles. The spiritual mystics will tell us because we all originate from the spiritual worlds of water where fish in the sea are always connected to their source. Moshe, the leader and the hero of very many ways, Passover, the name Moshe is not a Hebrew given name by his parents. It's a name given by Pharaoh's daughter because she drew him out of what? Water. So water is a very, very central theme throughout the Torah in general, but specifically around Passover. So water is symbolic of knowledge, of soul, of spiritual things. Remember before I mentioned immersion in the mikveh, Mei Hadas HaTorah, the pure waters of knowledge. Water is a symbol of connection. Things that are connected, anything in the water feels is connected to its source. On land, we identify land with things that are parched, dry, arid, sometimes lacking moisture, lacking life. Water is always full of life. Water, there's nothing dead inside of water. Water is when they're looking for water on other planets, is the first sign there will be life. So it's completely synonymous with life. Life cannot exist without water. Life as we know it. So in that sense, when you take your body, you take everything that's material and you dip it into salt water, you're submerging it. And you're making a statement. You're saying that the material world and everything I'm connected to in this material world is secondary and will be submerged in something that is watery, soulful. This needs to be, of course, applied to the inhibitions or the mitzrayim that you identified before we began, and you'll see that you'll be able to apply it. What, for example, in relationships are you looking for? Very often, just using a very simplistic problem, obviously it can get much more complicated. Very often our priorities, what we look for in a healthy relationship, are very materialistic. About financial security, physical attraction. Not that those things don't matter, but without the soul, those things are meaningless, absolutely. They will never create an enduring relationship. Enduring relationship has to do with soul things. If you also get into the package something that's materially good, great. And I'm not saying it has to be optional. It's not that you should marry someone you're repulsed by, obviously. It's just the question is, what are you worshiping? And who's master, who's slave? So just in that question itself can force you to think about relationships in a new way. What are your priorities? I just use that as an example. The same thing can be with many other things. That we are searching for happiness or searching to get beyond those boundaries, mitzrayims, critical to distinguish the matter and the spirit of that particular item. Now, a second element, as I just referred to, it's not just water, it's salty water. Salt water, like the sea. Everything that exists on the macrocosm exists in the microcosm. In the microcosm, salt water is our tears. Now, nobody likes to cry. Or at least they say men don't cry or whatever. But let me just tell you something. The Kabbalah says that tears are one of the most sacred experiences we could have. They bathe the soul. That's an expression in the Kabbalah. In the Zohar, it talks about Rabbi Akiva, when he would hear secrets of Torah, his eyes would fill with tears. Tears are sometimes misunderstood. People think tears are just about tears of grief and pain. I don't want to cry. But have you ever just burst out into tears for no apparent reason? Or stood in front of some awesome part of nature? Or just thought of something that was so pure and innocent, and you could cry. I know we have tearjerker films and movies that some people just cry at everything. I'm one of those guys. Some men do cry. But, is that superficial or not? Obviously, certain scenes and so on. But the Arizal says an interesting thing, not about this time of year. He says, a soul that does not cry, does not weep, between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is not complete. Crying is a sensitivity. It's an empathy. Now, of course, there's also tears that come out of grief or out of real loss or real pain. But that's only a limited part of tears. And even then, tears are healthy. Just to share with you a story that happened several years ago, which actually helped me understand karpas in a new way. Just a few weeks before Passover, a guy came to see me. I don't like to use the word pathetic on anybody, but he was a pathetic individual. No, not by my standards. He called himself that. When I say pathetic, I'll see in a moment what I mean. He was literally living like a hermit. I don't even know how he got to me. I think he came to this class. But just when I looked at him, I saw he's a person who's living in a shell. You could see just his body language was literally like a shell, like a turtle inside of a shell. Even though his face was there and his body was there, but he was like, I can't explain it. It was like someone that was curled up inside of himself. That's what I meant. So God forbid, I felt very full of empathy for him. When I say pathetic, I don't mean it in that sense, like, when you say you're pathetic, like that's usually an accusation. I didn't mean it that way. I meant it more, his life was extremely, and then he started sharing with me about his life. Not going into all the details, but it was a difficult life, abused from a very young age. Laughed at. He was like that laughing stock guy in school, but not once. Throughout all his years, he was always the loser type of thing. So you could imagine. I don't know how he began his life, but you can imagine what resulted from years of such. And then he began to feed into it. He began to be that person, the one that everyone expected him to be. It's very sad. It was one of the situations, one of the most difficult for me to deal with. I have no clue what to tell him. I'd like to give people hope. But even you got to give someone hope of something to hold on to, and I had really no idea what to say. Except just be kind, which I was. And he was even sitting with me. He was like waiting for me to beat him up in a way, like waiting for me to criticize him or something. I could see, everything he said was defensive. So without elaborating much, I'll tell you what I did. At some point, I had no words. I didn't know what to say. It was just such a sad scene. And of course, he's coming to me for hope. What could he do? What should he do? And it's like he was in the late 40s. So I asked him to stand up, and he stood up. And to his surprise, I went over and I hugged him. It was that. He was like shocked. And I didn't do it like as a pretense. I just wanted to hug him. And instead of obviously responding, he froze up literally like a pole, like a piece of concrete. I could see how wound up he was inside. First of all, probably no one ever touched him, at least not appropriately. And nobody ever hugged him. It was not a threatening hug. It wasn't like he was afraid. He just didn't know what to do with it. And I didn't say anything. I just felt it. He sat back down. I didn't want to in any way assault his psyche either. Just wanted to. And then I asked him the question. I said to him, "Do you ever cry?" And he said, "No, I don't cry. My father told me at 6 years old that only babies cry." And as a result, his father turned him into a 48-year-old baby. You understand? And he hasn't cried for 40 years. Literally. And then he said to me, the saddest thing, he said, "If I start crying, I'll never stop." So he knew that. And I told him, I said, "My goal here today is to get you to cry." That was what I suddenly realized. Not he took it the right way. I didn't get him to cry, by the way, but he cried afterwards. I said, you have to be able to release some of this energy. You see, tears are like the spout in a kettle. The kettle starts boiling and you have no release. What happens? It either explodes or it implodes. Psychologically, it implodes. And the knots, all those tears that were supposed to be a release. We don't really understand the process, but for some reason, when emotions well up, your tear ducts get filled up and it cries. But if you think about it, it's a form of release. It's a form of release. So that's why it's in a way, it's a bathing experience. It's a immersion type of thing. And here was a perfect example. And I tell you this, he helped me understand karpas, and I told him that. So it brought a smile to his face. Okay, we need to get him to cry, not just a smile. So for me, the crying was just to release anything. It's like cleaning the pores when you go into a bathhouse or you go into a schwitz or something. You just got to clean out the pores. The pipes have to be cleansed. Anyway, to go back to this karpas, no one should know of this extreme, but this is the symbolism of tears. And I don't know if it's going to be so wise if you're a guest in someone's Seder house to start crying at this stage. But you can blame, if you eat the onions, by the way, you could just blame it on the onions. That's true. That's a good one. So they think you're crying because of the onions, and meanwhile you're crying because your soul is hungry for something. And there are healthy tears. So all this karpa stage, and I'm elaborating because this will help us understand later stages, is about recognizing matter, being submerged in spirit, in water, and are recognizing that it's good to have tears once in a while. Tears also is a sign of sensitivity. You're aware of something. You cry over your situation. Trust me, it's better than if you don't. You know, because you're aware. You're aware that you're missing something. You're aware that you would like to have more. You know, it doesn't always mean tears of, as I said, of weakness. It's tears of empathy. Empathy for yourself, empathy for others. One of the greatest compliments and virtues when we talk about Rachel, wife of Jacob, was Rachel mevaka al baneha. That Rachel cries for her children. You know, I'm not a mother, but anyone that has been a mother, anyone who's a mother, we could all relate to the idea of crying for your children. It doesn't always mean crying because they did something wrong or because they're in danger. It's the empathy of a mother who thinks and cares about someone that they love. And Rachel is the epitome of that. So karpas, to sum up in this third step, is the process of recognizing body and soul, matter and spirit, and recognizing that what to prioritize. You submerge. You don't put the salt water into the vegetable. You put the vegetable into the salt water. Just for the record. Okay. We move now to step number 4. Yachatz. So yachatz literally means to break, to crack. So if you recall, I said that the 3 matzahs. Let's get to the technical, right? In the Seder plate. Here, who's running the Seder or whoever has a Seder plate, will take the middle matzah, this one, corresponding to the Levi, the singer, and break it into 2. With one part being like a quarter, the other 3/4, or a third and 2/3. Doesn't always work out that way, but you could try your best, you know. And you break it, and the bigger part will be set aside for step number 12, tzafan. It will be eaten as the afikomen. The smaller part will remain here. Now, what is the significance of breaking the matzah? So let me first explain what matzah is. Later I'll explain it more at length. And matzah is symbolic of another key component, another culprit that doesn't allow us to grow is our own pride and arrogance. Matzah is symbolic of humility. It's called the food of humility. If you look at a matzah, okay, take specimen A here. Everyone sees the matzah? This is made of the basest elements, as raw as it gets. Flour and water. No additives, no salt, no yeast, of course. It came out of an oven, and it was not allowed to rise. If it rises even a bit, it's thrown out. The antithesis of this would be a loaf of bread that has yeast. It's rich. It has additives. It's obviously inflated. The inflated ego versus the impoverished matzah. So it's the bread and food of humility, symbolic of humility. One great Rebbe writes that when you eat matzah, you're eating humility. You're eating godliness. No one's ever said anything like that. Actually, physically, you assume what you consume, or they say you are what you eat. So matzah is, we have not eating it right now, we're cracking it. But I'll elaborate later. Matzah, the flour and the water, is what? Is body and soul. Flour too, wheat, comes from the earth, and the water is like the soul. So matzah is, again, body and soul. But in this case, what we're doing is cracking it. What does the breaking of the matzah consist of? It means breaking with the past. It means that you're ready to break. There's no growth possible without a break. If we do it right, the break will be a painless one. If we do it wrong, it won't be so painless. A break, there's no way to get a new habit if you don't break an old one. If you have any mitzrayim in your life that's trapping you, that you want to get rid of, it's not going to happen just like, okay, one morning you wake up, it's gone. You're going to have to break with the past. So in addition to what I said so far, sanctification, washing your hands, cleansing, the body and soul, the matter and spirit, and the water, the salt water. Now we come another step, it's yachatz, it's breaking. It means that you recognize the need to break with something. You may have to give something up if you want something in return. It may mean you have to give up, breaking an addiction. Somewhere there's going to be a break. Now, it's not so comfortable to hear that, but there's no way out. There's no other way. Now, if everything is fine and you don't need a Seder, you don't need any transcendence, then it's another story. But we're talking to humans like us that want to do something new with our lives. Okay. So we go now to step 5. Step 5 is the bulk, the major part of the Haggadah. The first 4 steps we just did they are very short, relatively. A minute or two, a few minutes. The 5th step, Magid, is the main part of the Haggadah. Now, Magid means like Haggadah. That's the word. Haggadah is the noun, the narrative. Magid means to tell, the process of telling. Magid, to tell. V'yigadata levincha, if you recall. So this is, if you look at Haggadah, it probably consists of as I said, most of the pages. From here on, we go all the way to the end, to step 6, will be the bulk pages of the Haggadah. The Magid begins with, it begins with the 4 questions of the children. So this is reciting the Haggadah. I wrote parameterized, whatever that means. Okay. The Haggadah is the story of our lives, of all the harsh and oppressive forces in our personal Mitzrayim. I'm reading from this page, and our liberation from them. If we convince ourselves that our constraints are normal and healthy, we cannot free ourselves. So we tell the story, our story, by defining the parameters of our own internal exile. We begin the process of redemption. In therapeutic language, Magid means breaking the silence. You talk, and you speak about it. Now, I should say this because I got into trouble where I did this once, and people came back to me that they took control of a Seder, and it became group therapy because everybody started talking, and they couldn't know when to stop. So let me qualify this, that you have to really judge the table you're at before you do that. And even though Magid does say, open up and speak, but it has to be somewhat, let's say, camouflaged in the language of the Haggadah. So try to keep it somewhat balanced. But the psychological concept of Magid is definitely to tell the story. Telling the story is critical. They say, this is a harsh expression, but they say the silence was worse than the rape. Covering up something, a crime, is always worse than the original crime. Because, if someone's been violated or someone's been hurt, it happens. Not that I'm justifying it in any way. But when someone tells you don't have a right to cry out, to complain, or to say something, I was wronged, and you're silenced as if nothing happened, no big thing, minimized, or you were at fault, etc., then there's no healing. God forbid a person gets a cut on their finger. And if it's not exposed to fresh air, it won't heal. An infection needs fresh air. It needs to be exposed. If we become unaware of a pain in our bodies, that's where the biggest trouble becomes. Pain itself is a healthy thing. It's a warning signal there's something wrong. You do not want, God forbid, anyone's nerves severed to the point they cannot feel they're biting their tongue, or that they're in any other way hurting. Now, no one should know of pain. We take painkillers, and hopefully many pains can be gotten ridden just with a painkiller in an instantaneous way. But many pains are a sign of something deeply a problem. There's a problem. So Magid, the idea of breaking the silence, of speaking, telling the story, is ultimately the greatest expression and celebration of a person's dignity. And this is what we teach our children. And here's the central part of the Haggadah. It begins with the children asking the questions. 4 questions. I'm not going to go through the 4 questions themselves. This, again, is, if you go online to Meaningful Life, you write 4 questions. You'll find a whole section on Passover. There's a lot of supplementary material to this discussion here. I definitely encourage you to go there because it elaborates on some things that I'm being brief about. So, the 4 questions. It struck me a few years ago. As a child, I always asked these 4 questions to my father, who sat proudly and listened. Then my children asked me these questions, and I sat proudly and reminded myself of the saying that by the time you're old enough to know that your father was right, your children telling you you're wrong. And but then a few years ago, as my children were asking these questions, they're no longer just children, they're married now, and thank God. And I realized that 2 of the 4 questions are not answered in the Haggadah. The 4 questions consist of, the famous Manishtana, why is this night different than all other nights? Followed by a different order, but the order that I grew up with was, why do we dip twice karpas in salt water, the vegetable in salt water, and then later the maror, the bitter herbs in charoses, in that paste. Then comes the why do we eat matzah, why we eat bitter herbs, and why we recline. I realize in the Haggadah, when you read through the whole Haggadah, you only get answers to two questions. Why we eat matzah and why maror, not the first and fourth question. Why we recline and why we dip. Nowhere will you find an answer, not even alluded to. So this was my fifth question that I asked at the Seder, after my children asked the four questions, just to make a little trouble, which was why encourage children to ask questions and you don't give them the answers. You don't even make an attempt to give them the answers. So one cynic at the table said, listen, by the time the Seder is over, the children are asleep anyway, so they don't know that there were no answers. You could always tell them, yeah. Okay, that's very sweet and cute, but the problem is they will get older, and then what are you going to say? You know, not that simple. And then it struck me that it's quite deliberate, because the Seder is very precise. It would be very easy to add a paragraph and answer these questions. The reason is because the real freedom, and Passover is about freedom, is the right to ask questions. Question of a wise person is have the answer. And you want the children not just to ask, but also to pursue the answers themselves. And here's the best proof. You know, our enemies make us wise. In any totalitarian regime, you look around, what's the first thing they establish when they take control? A Bureau of Truth and Information. As soon as you hear there's a Bureau of Truth and Information, you can rest assured it's not true nor information. Because what do you need a bureau? Why can't everybody just figure it out? Because they want what's called mind control. They have to control the airwaves, television, radio, newspapers, internet. Because if information gets out, people see there are other options. They see there are others that think like them. They see they're not that crazy. They challenge the authority of whoever's in charge. You saw it somewhat in Egypt recently. So information is a very threatening thing to anyone who wants control. So what is the antithesis of that? Pharaoh was the same way. Pharaoh enslaved the Jews. No questions. No challenging. You can't go anywhere. There's no hope. You're stuck here. So what's the antithesis of slavery, freedom, is the right to ask. The freedom to be able to challenge, to question. Which also dispels a major myth around religion. In the Enlightenment, the big stereotype, and unfortunately has been fed by many so-called religious people, I say so-called for the following reason, is that that religion is about conformity, mind control, closed-mindedness, cultish, because questions are to be feared. Questions can challenge faith. Questions can challenge the authority of the religious authorities. When Galileo, the classic story, came to his discoveries, he was forced to recant because it was challenging the authority of the church. Well, I can't talk for other religions, but I could just say Judaism is built on questions, not on conformity. And Abraham, starting from Abraham and Moses and all the greats, they were all challengers. They didn't accept any status quo. They challenged God, for that matter. Forget about challenging other authorities. God, the ultimate authority. And Judaism that's why Jews argue about everything. Now, obviously, arguments as an end in itself can spill over to divisiveness and not exactly something that's healthy. But healthy skepticism in the free inquiry and seeking to find truth is critical in any free process. So the whole Haggadah is called that. You shall, when your children will ask you, you shall tell them. It could be read, they shall ask you, not just when they will ask you. It's actually a command. And we encourage our children, we command them in a way to ask and to challenge. And that's the key thing. So it's true. We would like to have the answers, but the Haggadah, more importantly, is that you ask the questions, and if you don't have the answer right now, you'll get it later. And some answers may be best, your parents shouldn't answer, your adults shouldn't answer, find the answer yourself. So that's the essence of Magid. It's the dialogue, an exchange between the questions of the children, the answers and replies of the parents, and we read the story of Passover. Unfortunately, often this section is read, some songs are sung, but it's not made relevant. So think of this section as the place where you really, and this is of course is critical, you are breaking the silence, you are communicating. You are saying to yourself or to God, you don't have to say it at the table, depends who you're sitting with, that enough is enough. I want out of here. I want to find transcendence. I want to find some freedom from my slavery. You'd be surprised the power of articulating your problem, how it helps. Because as I often describe from the Baal Shem Tov, there's a darkness, and there's a darkness that conceals the darkness. You don't even know it's dark. So defining your problem, identifying it, and helping communicate it is very much part of this stage. So we finished the first 5 steps. As you'll see, these are mostly cognitive, emotional, and psychological steps. Even though there are physical things we did, made kiddush on the wine, washed our hands, karpas, dipped, broke the matzah and magid, but compared to the next 5 steps, or 6 steps, these are still preparatory in a way. They like set the stage. But they're all steps in the journey toward that transcendence I was describing. So let's move on now to step 6. At step 6, which by this point, by the way, which I didn't mention, 2 cups of wine have already been drunk. Does anybody feel drunk yet? Think about it. The first cup was drank right after Kiddush. The second cup is drunk right at the end of step 5. After that comes Rachza. Rachza is another washing of the hands. If you recall, washing is always symbolic of going to another plane, going to another stage in life. So, if the first 5 steps went well, so Rachza now leads us into a new department, a new dimension. And here we're going to actually perform some real mitzvahs. Till now, most of this was customs. The mitzvahs of actually eating matzah, which is the biggest mitzvah, of course, but also eating the herbs, and then eating a sandwich of both of them, and then eating a full meal. This is what the next 6 steps consist of. So let me explain what this is, and I think with the introductions I gave, I don't have to elaborate as much, because you'll see whatever we spoke about till now comes now to a full bloom, in a way. So Rachza, as I said, wash our hands, and this time we do make a blessing. This Rachza is not on a vegetable dipped in salt water, this time it's on matzah. So it's the real thing. The real thing, the flour and water, as I said, the base elements. So we wash our hands. Once we are elevated to a higher level of holiness through the first 5 steps, we wash our hands again, preparing ourselves for the next stage of spiritual growth. We take our newly formed psychological mindset of freedom and begin to actualize it in our material lives. So this, as opposed to the first 5 steps, which is the mindset, the basic principles, this is now, we're beginning to actualize it. So see the next few steps as actualization. The next step after washing our hands is moitzi. It's on the second side. It's reciting the blessing hamotzi. 7 and 8 are like 2 steps in one. What I mean by that is it's 2 blessings that we make as before we're going to eat the matzah. So we make one blessing that we make every Shabbos and every time we wash for bread. Hamotzi, lechem min aretz. I'll explain that, what that is. And then we make a second blessing that's specifically on eating matzah, because it's a specific mitzvah. So on Shabbos you make one, for example, Friday night, or Shabbos when you wash, you'll make one blessing, here you'll make 2. Hamotzi is integrate. Remember the symbolism. Matzah is what? Water and flour. Body and soul. Bread in general, and matzah in particular, is in essence the whole story of life, which is everything that consists of matter and spirit. But do you recognize the spirit within? So in Karpas, in stage 3, we learned, and we were, like in a sense, we're trained to think in terms of matter and spirit. Here we're actually going to actualize it. So the blessing, Hamoitzi lechem min haaretz, what does it mean? Blessed is God who drew, who allowed bread or grain to come out of the earth. To paraphrase a verse in the Torah that everyone knows, not on bread alone does man live, but on the word of God. On the word, on the spark of God, or the word of God that's inside the bread. Not on bread alone. Think of it in terms of our lives. Many of our challenges are financial, recession-oriented, challenges around, as one of my talks that I gave recently, is your self-worth defined by your net worth? If it is, you're in trouble, in deep trouble. Not only because of the recession, but in general. Because that means that your self-worth is basically enslaved to your net worth. And if that fluctuates, your self-worth fluctuates with it. You don't want your self-worth defined by the stock market. You want to diversify and have a portfolio of many things in your basket, many eggs in your basket, including not just financial eggs, but also spiritual ones, family, friends, causes, things that give you meaning. So even if one part of our portfolio is compromised, another part is there. So the idea of recognizing not on bread alone, but the spirit within is critical to all happiness and to freedom in every possible way. Because everything that you're involved in, that you worship or that you are enslaved to, means that you are not recognizing the spark within. You are trapped in the body of it. So Hametzi Lechem in Haaretz is the first blessing, to recognize that there's a spirit within. There's someone that brought this bread out. It's not on bread alone. It's not on matter alone that we exist. And matzah is the second half of it. Matzah is the bread of humility. It's the humility necessary to experience something called faith. Matzah sometimes is called the bread of faith. So I'm reading the second, number 8. By eating the matzah, the food of bittul means humility, we assume its qualities. As I said earlier, as the Rebbe Marash writes, eating matzah is like eating godliness. On the first night of Passover, matzah is called the bread of faith. On the second night, it's called bread of healing. So matzah is meant to be a force that reminds us that what you put into your mouth, what you digest, is not just food for indulgence, but something spiritual in nature, humility in nature. And if now I know some people who are addicted to eating matzah, which of course is an oxymoron, and that could be a problem. But it really should be actually not that matzah shouldn't taste good. So I don't particularly love matzah, but some people love it. Nothing wrong with loving it, but don't start worshiping it, because then you'll be enslaved to the thing that's supposed to be freeing you, which is somewhat of a problem. We call religious addiction, matzah addiction. But the point is, as you understand, it's a point of freeing us, of recognizing something that's humble. So it's clearly different. It's clearly not just indulging. The sitting at the Seder table teaches you that you're not just eating whatever you like. That alone is already a freeing thing. You don't indulge in everything you like. We do things sometimes because of a higher calling. So matzah is humility, that critical component. Remember, we were talking about the different culprits and suspects that help contribute to not making any changes in your life. The ones I mentioned was inertia, routines. I mentioned raw materialism. I mentioned humility, arrogance and pride, silence. So now we're introducing we're discussing. We just did the practical implementation of this big mitzvah of eating matzah. But we go now to step 9. Right, following that, we make another blessing, and this time we eat maror. Now, maror is supposed to be symbolic of the suffering of the Jews in Egypt. But think about it. Let's not kid ourselves. Eating a little horseradish that's sharp is a far cry from being enslaved under the whip of monsters. So what does it mean exactly? The key thing to remember is maror is more about empathy than it is about bitterness. It's feeling sad for another. So maror is supposed to remind us, because it's not pleasant to the taste. It's a bitter taste. So what is maror? Pain of growth. The bitter maror teaches us about the process of growth, that setbacks and pain in life strengthen us. The maror is dipped into sweet charosos to demonstrate that even when we need to feel bitterness, its purpose and objective is for us to reach a greater freedom. So here's the next thing, next culprit that doesn't allow us to get out of our addictions and mitzrayim. You know what it is? It may surprise you. Lack of empathy. Being insensitive. And of all people, to yourself. When a person is addicted to something, whatever it may be, who are they hurting most? Themselves. Of course it has effects on others as well, but the biggest damage is to yourself. The traps and mitzrayim that you're stuck in, of all people, it affects you more than anyone. And yet we see how hard it is to get out of our own things. That means we don't really have empathy for ourselves. In a healthy way, I mean. I don't mean someone who just wants self-pity. I'm talking about empathy, a healthy empathy that motivates you to want to do something about it. it's easy to cry for someone that you see is weak or homeless. Another thing is to help them grow. So we're talking about an empathy that comes from strength. Maror is that sense. That's why maror is in the middle of the Seder plate. Usually maror, if it's bitter, should be gevura, severe, on the left side. Maror is in the center, because center is rachamim, tiferes, because it's sense of empathy. Starting for yourself, it's sensitivity. So look, the Seder is telling us, you don't feel sensitive? Here, stick some bitter herbs in your mouth, and maybe wake you up a little. It's supposed to obviously not just be bitter herbs, it's supposed to remind you that life has a certain bitterness to it. And that bitterness is healthy because it's part of growing and the transition. A child will cry the first day it goes to school. There's never been a child that has not cried. And a child that has not cried is probably for different problems. Maybe home was worse than in school. But why does a child cry? Because the separation. The child is accustomed to its parents. We all will have times where we feel out of place. But part of growth and maturity is recognizing it's a little uncomfortable, but this is what makes me grow. If you ever had those situations, you have to make a phone call that's important, but you push it off like for 30 years? Or more? What's 30 years, right? In a lifetime. Yeah. I do it. Sometimes I need to raise some money for something. Trust me. Man, I find every excuse. And then I make sure I call 501. I hope I get the machine. And they say, oh, it wasn't there anyway. That's what it feels like. Maror is nothing compared to raising money, but that's a separate issue. Or other things like that. When you have to have closure or something, and you finally made a decision, and you don't want to disappoint, but you got to close it. We all have these resistance. Sometimes we like to hire other people to do it for us, but there's something about doing it yourself. And so maror is all about that. It's that unpleasant feeling that's part of any transition. So it's not unpleasant as an end in itself. Like I said, we dip the maror in charoises. It's a sweet paste made of wine, nuts, and apple, maybe sometimes pear or whatever other things. And it is that paste. So it's to show us that it's not bitterness as an end in itself. It's just the transition and having that type of empathy. So if you think of matzah and maror, matzah is like humility, and maror is that sensitivity. But then comes the interesting thing. And this is also, should add, this is also the cycle of life. It's another thing that's critical. In the process of freeing yourself from your mitzrayim, you have to know there's a cycle. Nothing is linear. The cycle is you hold on to something until you can let go, and then you move on. If you don't know that process, the secret to that process, you get stuck. You see, many of us remain stuck in whatever it is that we're trapped in because we don't think there's an alternative. It's like getting stuck on a ladder, and you don't know there's another rung. So you just keep on going in circles on the same step. When you recognize there's another rung, you say, you know what? I can climb and I'll still have something to hold on to. So maror and matzah, in a way, is that cycle where maror is that there are times that things are going to be a little sadder and bitter, and there are times that things are going to be more joyful. Recognizing that cycle is critical. It's a time to cry, a time to laugh. So we come now to step 10, and step 10 is what Jews always do so well. Everything becomes one. Korach is a sandwich called a bittersweet. We actually take matzah and maror now and put them together in a sandwich. This is telling us that the cycle is complete. It's not just about being some bitterness and some humility and matzah. It's that they all become part of one picture. So I'll read here. We combine the matzah's earthiness and bittul and the maror's bitterness dipped in sweet charoses. There's a time for the sweet and a time for the bitter. But then we must learn to join them both into one seamless experience called life. You've heard of that? Life. The mission for which we are sent here by God, and then we have freedom. So Korach is a conclusion of these 5 steps of the actual application of the things that we learned about and prepared ourselves in the first 5 steps. So 5 and 5. This application. First through the matzah and the blessings on it, the maror, and now the sandwich. Now, I just might want to make one disclaimer or qualification. This is pretty intense. If you get through one level here, and psychologically, you'll be fine. But I promise to go through all 15, so I will. But I just want you to know that you don't have to feel pressured. And well, maybe you should, because if you feel pressured by the 15 steps, it may take your mind off some of your other mitzrayim that are trapping you. But on a serious note,
You don't have to feel pressure that you have to do every step here perfectly. It's really meant to open us up to the different traps that we have to free us. So everybody understand that, right? Because I don't want this to turn into like, this is undoable because it's so many steps. But you have to remember, we are talking about 3,323 years of experience, all captured in 15 steps. You have to say that's pretty good. It helped us get through a Holocaust, pogroms, inquisitions, crusaders, you name it. So it's not that bad. But on a personal level, the 15 can be quite overwhelming. So I just wanted to tell you could chill out. Don't feel so intense about it. I, frankly, would focus on the three things that you want to free yourself from and go through the steps and see the ones that you can respond to. And if something doesn't really work, it's fine. There's always next year in Jerusalem, and there's always the second Seder, of course. So I just wanted to relieve you. I don't want to, this has to be done with some type of lightheartedness. Okay, so now we go to the next and final 5 steps. But here's step number 11. This is a very interesting one. It's called eating the meal. This is what everybody usually waits for. But the interesting part here is usually in Jewish tradition, eating the meal is like after the ritual. You make Kiddush, let's say on Shabbos or holidays. You eat some challah. That's on a regular Shabbos and a holiday. And then you sit down to a meal. And that's that. In Passover, the meal is part of the 15 steps. It has 10 steps before it, and will have 4 steps afterwards. So it's interesting. It doesn't end, which tells us that it's part of the process. Why is it part of the process? So Bertrand Russell can teach us why. No, not that he did any Seders, but he said something once that will be very helpful to understand why. Bertrand Russell said, he was once asked how he could behave unethically when he's a professor of ethics. He said, I teach mathematics and I'm not a triangle. In other words, you can teach something and not be it. One of the cardinal so-called, what do we call it, sacred cows of academia, would that be right, sacred cows, is detachment, moral neutrality. It almost feels like being godlike, morally neutral. We just tell you the truth. Objectively, we have no moral interest, as if anybody's completely objective. Even being invested in not having morality is also, you can explain it as quite a subjective place. Which is why often in the areas of academia you find a lot of corruption, especially in the areas of sexuality and other abuses of power, because it's like this type of, I'm above the law because I'm teaching the truth. So Bertrand Russell, I don't know if that's what he meant, but he did say that you can teach ethics and not be ethical, basically. Maimonides, on the other hand, in contrast, and Judaism says that's not absolutely unacceptable. Not that we don't all have our shortcomings, but as a standard to justify it as if it's like holy, no. There's a seamlessness. Truth means truth consistently, from beginning to the middle through the end. That's emes, aleph, mem, tov. Truth means that what you teach, you want to live by. Yes, you make a mistake, but you acknowledge it was a mistake. You don't deify and worship detachment. It's about a seamlessness that you are what you teach what you are. And where do you see a person's truth? Not in their oratory brilliance and academic academies. You see it in how they eat and sleep and do small things. So Shulchan Aruch is a simple meal. It's a meal, like any meal in the year, obviously with Passover products. But it's a meal. You eat, and that's where you see how you've done. That's the litmus test that the previous 10 steps have done something to you. So it's not like the meal is outside of the journey. It's part of it. You won't find on any mystical system that type of integration, that we look at the way we eat a plain meal as the sign of how you just experience your spiritual growth here. Many people say, okay, I experience spiritual growth, but my meal is, I eat a regular meal. No. The meal should be eaten differently. So we're going to test you on that one, okay? But you could test yourself, rather. And so Shulchan Aruch is do it. Now we sit and pass the meal. We don't wait for tomorrow after the Seder. Right now, you have the lab is open and the experiment goes on. How are you going to eat a meal? Is it going to be different? Are you going to look at materialism and indulgence in a new way? And if you don't, rest assured that probably the Mitzrayim that you entered in are not gone. If you do, you're the beginning of a freedom. Now this isn't such an easy thing to do because it requires conscientiousness, it requires sensitivity. But that's what step 11 is about. So, after the first 10 steps corresponding to the 10 sefirot of training to integrate spiritual freedom into our material lives, we are now ready for the first real test. Eating an entire meal in an entirely new way, one permeated with a sense of higher presence and godliness. Step now 12 to 15, as I mentioned before, is like, think of it like, the first 5 steps is like the takeoff, and the middle 5 steps is like the flight, and the last 4 steps is like the landing. But in psychological terms, here is another major culprit that I haven't yet identified. I identified before issues like inertia, pride, not willing to change, not willing to break yourself, silence. What else did we talk about? We talked about lack of empathy and sensitivity, and so on, lack of integration. But now comes the more difficult one. What about the unconscious resistances that we have? You know, you could say, I have my mitzrayim, I'll do whatever I can, but there's a lot of things that are unconscious. There are a lot of things that I picked up as a child. There are fears we have, we can't even identify. Not every inhibition and mitzrayim and restraint, constraint and boundary is something you can tackle head on. So here is a very powerful and very beautiful concept in Judaism. And it goes like this. God says, you deal. I meet you halfway. You deal with all your conscious and all the things that are in your power, and I will then help you deal with the things that are not in your power. So it's like meeting God halfway. Which if you think about it is very sensible and also very respectful. So it goes like this. There are things that we may not have control over. We all have all kinds of stuff in us that we may not have control over, as much as we try. But there are things you do have control over. Take care of those things, and God helps you on the unconscious level. So the next 4 steps, as you'll see, are, as opposed to the first steps were preparatory. The middle ones were our actions. We ate matzah, we ate maror, the sandwich, we made the blessings. Now, the rest of it is mostly what we will read. I mean, one step, final step, we will eat Daf Yomi in 12, but mostly what we'll read and allow God's presence to take over. That's the end of the God. Concluding with the final step, which is nothing that we do, it's just complete absorption. So let's go through those steps. You see, Tzofan is reveal, Berach is draw down, Halal let go, and Nirtza redemption. So Tzofan technically is the eating of the Daf Yomi. After the meal is over, like a form of dessert, remember that larger part of the matzah, the middle matzah that was broken in step 3, now in step 4 rather, now comes to fruition. In many homes, the children so-called steal and hide Daf Yomi. Tzofan means conceal. But we reveal what is concealed by eating Daf Yomi. So Tzofan refers to the concealed part of our consciousness, which is what we call the unconscious. I'll read it. Tzofan means hidden after we have eaten a complete meal as free people. Remember, a meal as free people, not as slaves, after the first 10 steps. A material meal eaten in a spiritual and refined way, we now have the power to reveal that which is hidden and unconscious. Tzofan, within ourselves and those around us. So no one can access the unconscious directly. But if you do what you have to do on the conscious levels, something emerges that allows that also will weaken the resistance and the slavery and the mitzrayim on your unconscious state. That's followed by berach. Berach is blessing. It's the blessing after the meal. But here in this case, it's a 13th step in the Haggadah. Berach gives us the power. Berach in Hebrew means to draw down. When you make barach, bracha means to draw down, to channel energy. Berach gives us the power to ensure that the meal, which is symbolic of all our material experiences, will yield the spiritual energy that lies within its divine sparks. Berach, to bless, means to draw down spirituality and godliness into the physical world. So Berach is the blessing after the meal, after which we will drink a 3rd cup of wine. Then comes Hallel. Hallel is continued verses, this is the praise, we praise God. But what does Hallel really mean? Hallel is the step of letting go. After we have done everything in our power to achieve freedom, we say Hallel, and through these words and praise, we place ourselves in God's hands. We surrender to God to complement whatever we cannot do on our own and to conclude the process of reaching complete freedom. Hallel also comes from the word Behila Nera, which means to illuminating flame. So here too, think of it this way. It's like you can come to the door and enter it, but then the experience has to emerge. You can do everything, for example, using love as an example in our relationships. There are many things we can do to help cultivate love for one another. You love somebody, you buy them a gift, kind words, sensitivity, you make time, whatever it is. But then there's something in love that you can't quite directly control. You can set the stage, you can set the mood. But there has to be something that emerges in two people that nobody can really own. You may have to do all the preliminary stages and then something emerges. All great things in life are that way. So that's why these last steps are in that context, where Hallel is you say God's praises. As a result, it's like warming God up in a way. And as a result, you get in return God's love, protection. This is an indirect way of accessing energy, power to deal with Mitzrayim in our lives. And finally, the 15th step, God's promise to accept our service, redemption. Unlike the previous 14 steps, the last and final step does not manifest itself in any prayer or action. There's no prayer or action, there's nothing you say. We have reached a point that transcends words and praise. After we completed our Seder service, we are accepted favorably nirtzah by God. This is when the love emerges. You can do nothing anymore. You did everything. You did the preliminary 5 stages. You did the actions. The next 5, you ate the meal. You did the other steps, which was praising and blessing and praising. Now something emerges. And that's when we say, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, which means next year in Jerusalem. There are things that we do, and there are things that emerge. This last step is complete emergence. And in a way, it's maybe the greatest level of all, because if it emerges right, it gives you the strength to overcome anything. You know, how shall I put it? I'm looking for a few examples. I'll give you an example. Sometimes you fight a battle in your life. Any type of battle. I mean, let's talk a psychological battle, or something that for years you've been struggling with. And you made your mistakes, but at the end of it, you did your share, you did fight. Now, some people just fight the rest of their lives. I'm not talking about that. But there comes a point where you did everything you can do. Then, as anyone who's been through this knows, there's some maturity settles in after a while, where you cease to be addicted to be battling, and you said, I did what I can do, and now let's see. It doesn't always mean it goes your way, but there's a peace that comes to you when you realize, I did whatever I can do, and now I put it in God's hands. I'm not talking about someone who did not do everything they can do. Because if they didn't, then there's maybe more that you can do. There's a certain piece of knowing what else I can't do anything more. And there's a maturity that emerges, a maturity that you can't really access without the experience. It's like the man with the money meets the man with the experience. So the man with the experience ends up with the money, and the man with the money ends up with the experience. You can't win. You can never achieve that through reading about it. Now, if it happens to you too many times, maybe you should get out of that business. But we all know the feeling. Someone so you can feel bitter and angry. Someone had one over you, or you could say, you know what, that person's more experienced, and now I will be more experienced. Obviously, we hope that this is always done ethically, but there's something that experience teaches us. That someone says to you, why can't you just give me the experience on a platter? Why can't you buy it? Why can't I read about it? There's nothing that will replace real, hard-earned experience. As simple as that. You hear it all the time in sports when it gets to the Super Bowl or the World Series, the experience of those that have been there already. And when you talk to people, anyone who's done something on a high level will tell you, it's like a soldier prepares for years. They may never even go to an actual battle. But then when you do, they are ready. They're in the zone. And there's no way you could be there without the years of experience. Then it comes natural to you. You always wonder, like, there's tennis matches, the final points of a major tournament. Even if you're watching it, you have the jitters. how could a guy even serve without shaking? But something is the experience, years of experience, trains that person to a point, that conditions them, that when they come into that moment, and they've done it enough times and lost enough times, they reach a certain place of peace. And it's also not guaranteed. When I was in Sydney, I was asked, I spoke in some crowds that were pretty big, and someone said to me, do you ever get the jitter? Do you ever get the butterflies? And the answer is you do. But it goes away very quickly. What do I mean you do? Because it's good. You want to excel. Even though you're very trained, I'm trained in doing this, and you've done it many, many times, and you're confident, but you still want to excel. You don't want to sound like a robot. And you always say to yourself, maybe one time I will, everybody fails once. But it's not so much the butterflies, it's about really the adrenaline that drives, that you're not taking for granted what you're doing. But because you're trained, you will do it effectively, and you have confidence in that. Now, all of us sometimes blow it, sometimes make our mistakes, and then you beat yourself up, and you try to be better next time. But the point is, in the Seder, and especially in the context of what I'm saying, freeing ourselves from Mitzrayim's, the early stages is the things we can do in our power. And there are areas that we cannot directly do something, but you train yourself well, the experience will emerge. And that's what God says in the final step, Nirtzah. It will be accepted. You don't have to do anything anymore. You did your work. You did your 15 intense steps. So, wow, that was a mouthful. Okay. Now this is just we'll applaud in a moment. That's the 16th step, is applause. Right? You want to just leave or what? I want to say something on a concluding note here, okay? Please. This is just what we just did was a so-called trial run. Now, the Seder is when it really happens. So I want to just reiterate that the more you prepare, the better you'll do. And this is a personal journey, and that can lead you to great, great places. I feel quite enriched just doing this right now with you. I'm thinking to myself what inhibitions and fears I've got, and I have to work on that. It's just so identify. The more you identify, the better it will be. And don't be ashamed to identify it. Don't be afraid. If you want to have a good friend that you can consult with, that can help you make sure you're being objective and you're not playing around, by all means. And then the Seder. So when you're at a Seder table, I want to just say, if you're hosting it, you definitely can set the stage. Some people ask me when I've done this in the past, if you host it, what happens with people not in the mood? So you have to play it by ear. I would not impose this on anybody. You have to see who your guests are. Some guests are not ready for such an intensity. They won't even, so maybe just share one little short word. If you have guests that are more, you can even prepare beforehand. One of the 15 steps that you'll find online, I actually prepared an exercise where you can take the 15 steps and have characters play them out. If you like, do a little Passover game. There are people who are great breakers. There are people who are great sandwich makers. There are people who are great concealed ones. You can find personalities for each one of these steps. I actually did it. So if you go 15 steps on just search on our website, you'll find it. Now, I want to finally say that by no means is this all exhaustive. Hopefully this can help. And as I said, more important just to choose something that you can internalize rather than doing it all. I did the full version here without any didn't mince any words. All the 15 steps. But ultimately, for it to work, you have to do it at your pace. Now, if you're a guest at a table, obviously, if you want, you can share a thought or not, depending on, or more than a thought with the people at the table. But internally, you can do whatever you want. You're sitting at a Seder, you're allowed to think whatever you like to think, as long as you cooperate according to the rules of the house. So, I want to wish everybody to have hopefully a very transformative Seder. I'd love to compare notes with you. Next Wednesday will be Passover, so there won't be a class. But the following one after will be the day after Passover. So I'd love to hear your thoughts and your feedback, what happened, and just do me a favor, don't make too much trouble. Do it all and I'm saying that because I had some calls from hosts that said, what did you do to these people, You empowered them or whatever. And above all, I want to wish you all a great blessing, a warm blessing of having what we call a kosher Freilich and Pesach. That means a kosher and happy Passover. We have matzahs for everybody here? Yeah? Everybody got? So you have matzahs. These are the real thing. Presented by the Chabad of the Loft, where we are now, where this event is being hosted. Because Rabbi Bunkhalter suggested that we do this special workshop this week, which I was glad to do and happy to do. Been hosting us here and very gracious. So if anybody needs anything, any other things, help for Passover, which is maybe a place to go for a Seder, if you let me know, or Rabbi Bankhalter or Belleville, depending where your location is, obviously the Seders will be held actually here, public Seders, so you can definitely do it here. But if for any reason you're traveling, or you have a friend or a relative, which I think I think a good thing to do before Passover is we welcome everyone in to the Seder. Is if you have anyone where they are, maybe you give them some type of provocative inspiration to make them want to do it. So wherever you are in the world, if you let us know, we'll be happy to suggest something, because there are Seders going on everywhere. There's really no reason the person shouldn't have a good Seder, a meaningful one. And so please just contact us. We'll see us as a resource, correct? And let's see here, what else can I say? It's an honor to have presented these 15 steps, and I hope you use them well. Oh, okay. Yes, a few plugs here. Being that we start counting the Omer Tuesday night, the second night of Passover. So some of you may be familiar with the Omer book that I was honored to compose. We also have a daily Omer reminder, a free Omer reminder every day. Every day has like an exercise. It's a good book. I would recommend it. And I also have something I did many years ago, which it's not quite what we did here, but a little more synopsized. 15, the soul of the Seder, 15 steps, if you want to have that. These are for you to take. This is a good companion to the Haggadah. Feel free to obviously use it. And I said again, I want to just dedicate, because a very dear friend of mine passed away on this Monday. His name is Arthur Gold, who the husband of Stella Gold, who passed away 4 weeks ago. I just want to say one short thing, if I may, because they were very close to me, and there's a very touching story. They came to this class for many years, and they declared themselves as two atheists. He was a psychiatrist, she was a copyright attorney, but they were, I would say, probably the most truthful people I've ever met. And I say that without exaggeration. They were honest. They could not even bring themselves to say that we believe in God, because they had doubts. Most of us are flippant. We're very easy. I believe in God, and then you go ahead and do things that God doesn't want you to do. They had a problem with that. So, pretty rare type of individuals, I must say. And when they came over 10 years ago, their son Matt brought them along. And they told me, we're atheists, not agnostics, atheists. But I will just say that a few months after but they came to my class, and I talked about God. Your God we can deal with. That was not a problem for them. I never challenged them, but let me tell you this. As I told them, I prefer atheists like that than many believers I know. A few months after maybe a half a year after they started coming to my class. They took me out to dinner, an atheist restaurant in Manhattan called Prime Grill. Only atheists go there. That's a joke. I don't want to be sued. Believers too. It's for everybody. So we went there, and in the middle of the meal, Arthur says to me, and he was a very rational, very, very brilliant man. He says to me, I want to ask you something. I want to start putting on tefillin, and I want to know your opinion. Tefillin. Tefillin is what men do after bar mitzvah, phylacteries, and the head, the arm. And his wife Stella was there. So I said, so what do you think? So she says, absolutely. She wants me to do it. He says, she's encouraging me. And so I said, so what are you asking me? Your wife wants you. You want. God says so. What do you need? What do you need from me? He says, but I don't believe. So I don't know. What do you say? So I said to him, look, Jews put on tefillin. You're a Jew. I said, Jews put on tefillin. He started crying like a baby. And he reminded me of the story many, many times. How he just was touched by the fact that I told him you're a Jew and Jews put on tefillin. So whether he believes or not, it was very moving. He came with me to Crown Heights, and he didn't just buy tefillin. He bought the biggest ones possible, much bigger than mine, and the most pious people. And he would put on every day. And then he built himself a Jewish library. And then I came to visit him when his wife passed away a month ago. He was pretty old. He was sick, but I saw that he didn't want to be here anymore. Remember, they were high school, but what do you call it, sweethearts. And they're best friends, literally. Very rare to see this. So you tell me that they don't have faith. And some birds have to fly together. So she went, he went a few weeks later. But he said to me, when I sat with him, he said to me, I don't know if there's a heaven. These were his last words to me. But if there is, my wife is there. So I told him, I know there is, and she's there. Now he's there too. So I just went to, the funeral was literally yesterday. I was there all day in Cherry Hill. And I just wanted to share it because, number one, it's very moving. And also, I was very close to both of them. What shall I say? Today they're together. So I wanted to honor this Seder, this class to them. And to their two sons, Andrew and Matt. We're working on them as well. We'll find out. I'm going to invite them to my Seder, so hopefully they'll come. So again, if anybody needs any help with Passover, please let us know. If you have not signed up, the emails that I send out every week to keep you informed, please do so. Philip will be giving his class tomorrow night in his place, right? Belleville? I think so. I got an email. Yes, 7. And it was a great honor again. Everyone have a very good Passover, and I shall see you transcendent and new and fresh